note that items listed here as consent calendar items are considered routine and will be acted upon collectively by one motion adopting the planning department's recommendation unless a member of the public, the commission, or its staff asks to remove an item for discussion. Prior to the motion, the chairperson will ask if anyone wishes to remove an item from the consent calendar. The only item on the consent calendar is the approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting on April 13th. Would anyone like to remove this item for discussion? Okay, can I have a motion then to adopt the minutes of April 13th?
Chair, I would like to make an addition to the minutes on page D1, point I.3, under item J, items initiated by the commission under number 1, standards for home sizes, lot coverage, floor area ratio of simple Brisbane. After discussion amongst commissioners, Commissioner Anderson stated he would like to table the discussion. I think it should be added that Commissioner Anderson, you also said you may reintroduce at a later date. I'd like to have that clarification inserted.
It's not inaccurate as written, but I see no harm. All right, then with that one modification, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda of the meeting of 13th April?
Make a motion to adopt the agenda, the minutes from April 13th, 2017 with one modification as noted.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oral communications. Does anyone have anything to discuss that is not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, move on to written communications. We have received a flyer and a letter from the Sustainable San Mateo County. It's their winter 2007 update. That's all that we've received. New business. We have a staff report on the public hearing of zone text amendment RZ 217, amendment to chapters 1702, 1716, 1719, chapter 1732 of Title 17, zoning of the Brisbane Municipal Code to implement housing elements program HB1G, to clarify existing definitions related to office uses, streamline rooftop solar energy systems. City of Brisbane is the applicant.
Thank you, Chair. So the zoning text amendment before you tonight would have three main purposes. The first would be to implement housing element program HB1G regarding single room occupancy units. The second would be to clarify existing definitions related to office uses, specifically in the Crocker Park zoning district. And the third would be to streamline the approval process for rooftop solar energy systems that are relatively low rise and relative to the roof structure by exempting certain solar panels from the height limitations of the zoning district. So regarding the housing element implementation, the reference program in the housing element, which was adopted in 2015, commits the city to amend the zoning ordinance to permit single room occupancy units as conditional use in the SCR01 district. So it should be noted that multifamily housing is already a conditional use that's allowed in the SCR01 district, and the existing definition of multifamily housing in the zoning ordinance references single room occupancy units as being qualified as multifamily. So it's already implied under that code section that, yes, SRO units as a form of multifamily housing would be allowed as a conditional use. However, our program obligates us to state it more clearly. In order to implement that, the zoning text amendments would add a standalone definition of single room occupancy units that references the definition of multifamily dwelling where it's actually defined. And it would also amend the SCR01 district conditional uses list to specifically include single room occupancy units. So truly meeting the spirit and intent of that housing element program. And then just a little explanation. So SRO units, they're a type of multifamily housing, usually efficiency units that are limited in their occupancy. They may include a kitchen or bathroom. Typically, you'll see shared kitchens, for larger SRO developments. But of course, they may include a kitchen. And again, we already defined them in our multifamily dwelling definition.
I'm curious about one thing. I'm wondering why the SRO amendment applies to SCRO 1 district and only SCRO 1.
That was what the housing element program directed us to do. I'm sure my colleague here, who actually spearheaded the housing element update, may be able to give a little more background on why we didn't include other districts.
One of your staff on that one, but
so they individually examined Brisbane and examined our districts and selected this as
the city selected that zoning district for this particular use as a certain class of housing. So this is just a clarification. So once the housing element is adopted by council, it goes on to the, or actually indication that they will adopt it. It goes on to the state for review. The state, HCD, provides input, and some of it is just clarification issues, and that's what these fall into, is clarification of what Brisbane had said that it would do, and in fact has done.
I see. So it's because SCRO 1 was previously zoned for multifamily housing, and it's the only zone that was so zoned.
It was, that's correct. That class, the single room occupancy was added to that district in particular.
All right.
Okay, any other questions on this part?
Yes, I'd just like to ask a question. Does this recognize the mobile home park for
The
the
mobile home park-
underneath this?
Well, the mobile
designation?
home park is in the SCR1 district.
Right.
However, it's not considered an SRO development. So
If I may, through the chair, just add to that. So there's another program or policy in the housing element that actually addresses the mobile home park that we intend to preserve it. And this was per council's direction that they wanted to keep that as a mobile home park, and so it didn't get bought up by a developer and converted to something else that they could presumably make lots of money on. And so that program is yet to be implemented, but we do expect to bring that forward to you, and not the next month or two, but the fairly near future.
the next year.
The next year, yeah.
Okay. Shall I go on? Okay, so the next prong of this zoning text amendment would clarify an existing inconsistency in our zoning ordinance related to the term used as professional services. So there is a permitted use in the TC1 Crocker Park District called professional services. This term is not defined in our zoning ordinance. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the zoning ordinance except for as a permitted use in the Crocker Park District. Doing a little bit of research, we just found that it apparently used to be a term that was used at some point, was removed, except for this one place in the zoning ordinance. So it's a legacy term that was just missed. Looking at the definition of professional services, typically that would be any service provided by a profession, which in the zoning parlance typically refers to engineers, architects. It does not include doctors' offices. So specifically in our zoning ordinance, especially medical facilities is the term we use for doctors, dentists, that sort of office that is connected to a medical use. Our zoning ordinance defines offices, and the definition is here for you on the screen. I won't read it, but it basically includes any office space, a room or group of rooms that's used by individuals practicing a business or a profession. So the recommendation to eliminate professional services as a permitted use from the TC1 district would not eliminate the allowed office use in the TC1 district for use by professionals of those professions. So in summary, it's a term that is not defined anywhere else, that is encompassed by another definition, that is already a permitted use in that district. Are there any questions on this? Okay.
I was just wondering if there are any uses outside of the scope of office that might be encompassed by professional services that are not encompassed by office.
It was our analysis as practitioners and interpreting the zoning ordinance that the definition of office is so broad that it would encompass anything that could be a professional service based on what our understanding is. Say other jurisdictions, we looked up, I would like to say up to 10 different cities in California that did have either professional services or a similar term, and they all referred to, again, the practicing offices of individuals of a profession. So it was our interpretation that the office definition would cover anything that would be a professional service. And of course, there are many other permitted uses in the Crocker Park District, in addition to office uses, as we know, that would encompass another variety of uses. So that was the clarification behind that. Okay, so moving on, the zoning text amendments also address additional streamlining of rooftop solar energy systems. So just a little bit of background. In 2015, the council approved a streamlined building permit review process for small residential rooftop systems. This was a state-mandated effort. And so basically what that procedure means is if you are a small residential rooftop system, so less than 10 kilowatts in size, which almost everything is, the city, its building department, its planning department are obligated to have an expedited review within 3 days of approval. In addition to having the maximum size for the actual system itself and having to be on a residential rooftop, the system under our zoning regulations would also have to comply with the maximum building height. Any rooftop system, residential, commercial, or otherwise, that exceeds the maximum building height would be subject to a height exception permit. This is an administrative permit in which essentially neighbors to the sides, rear, and across the street of the subject property are sent a notice saying your neighbor has applied for a solar system, it exceeds the height, we intend to approve it unless it would cause a adverse impact to the health and safety. So it's basically a notification to neighbors. If neighbors have a concern with it, they can write a letter to the zoning administrator. The zoning administrator is obligated to approve applications as long as there are no adverse impacts to the health and safety, which of course, when a building permit is required, that incorporates your electrical, all the health and safety standards encompassed in the California Building Code apply. And as you can imagine, for a lot of hillside homes in Brisbane, we see a lot of building permit applications for rooftop systems that meet all of the eligibility requirements for streamlining, except for the height. Because of our hillside lots, we have such a steep drop-off in grade, the way that we measure height, you go out 5 feet from the building wall, which if you're on a down slope, that could be a significant decrease in grade. So many building permit applications that would otherwise be eligible for the streamlining then have to go through at least 17 business days of the process for the height exception permit, in addition to the regular building permit review that would be applicable. So they are not truly being streamlined because of this height, the way that we require them to comply with height. So that's the current procedure. So in the spirit of streamlining, we are proposing some amendments that would exempt certain rooftop solar energy systems that do not exceed 2 feet from the actual roof structure from building height requirements. So any system that exceeded 24 inches from the roof structure would still be subject to maximum building height regulations and potentially the height exception permit process if they did exceed those maximum height limits. So to implement this, the amendments propose modifications to the existing height exception process described in 17.32.060C, just to add the exemption text there. And it also would modify the definition of height, so specifically to say how we measure rooftop solar energy systems. So that is detailed in the staff report, and I won't go into it during my presentation, but we can talk about it later. Here are some examples that were in the staff report, just to kind of give you an idea what does 2 feet or 24 inches really look like. This is a real life example from a building permit application in town on an anonymous property. So fairly low pitch roof here. And here's another application, actually for a slightly higher pitched roof, and you can see it's a little bit small. It's compared to our 2 foot elevation above the roof. On a higher pitched roof, obviously you can get a little bit closer to the roof structure. This, for example, is 5 inches from the actual roof. So in conclusion, we are recommending approval of the draft resolution recommending City Council adoption of the draft ordinance. And I will take any questions this time.
I'd like to ask about the procedure involved. I'm on page G.1.7, where it talks about rooftop energy systems that extend more than 24 inches. And it mentions that the zoning administrator is the one who can grant approval, but there's recipients, let me see here. Occupants are noticed on this. They have 10 days from the date of the mailing of the notice to respond with comments. And then it notes that the recipients of the letter have the right to appeal the decision of the zoning administrator to the Planning Commission. So could you clarify for me, if people receive, or if the zoning administrator receives written comments from the neighbors, does that automatically trigger that it's reviewed by the Planning Commission?
Typically, I mean, it's not stated in the ordinance, as you point out, but typically anytime the ZA receives any comments from neighbors, that would be an automatic trigger to where it would go to the Planning Commission.
Okay. That was my concern, just because if there are neighbors who might not get around to it in 10 days, that they've lost their right to appeal. So,
or they're out of town.
Or they're out of town, exactly. And 10 days can be tight.
Then that could be a great add-in.
So, okay, sorry, clarify, would you want to see a text change to the existing procedure?
I think that automatically, if anyone objects, it should go to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Automatically. Since I would not...
I agree with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't anticipate there'd be a lot of these.
No.
So I don't think it's going to be burdensome, but due to the fact that we're recognizing there are many homes that exceed the height limits for their district, and then if you're exceeding 24 inches, which is generous and promoting use of solar, I think that the neighbors should have a right to automatically have this heard. And then I have an additional question, if I may.
Okay.
Would this exception, let's say I'm going to submit plans for a new dwelling on a vacant lot, are they going to be able to exceed the height limit by 24 inches automatically with solar? If they say I'm going to have solar, so if the height limit's 30 inches, I'm going to do 30 inches, the max, and add my 24 inches of solar. Or will they be required, because it's new construction, to keep it within the maximum height?
We would measure the height of a structure, so the building, the house itself, to the midpoint of the roof, if it's a gable roof, to the point at grade at which we take our reference point. So the structure itself would have to comply with the height limit. Right. We're not exempting the structure. What would be exempt, though, would be if they, well, now they have to, in most cases, unless they are exempt for whatever reason, install. New homes are required to either have cool roofs or solar. So we'd be measuring the height of the structure under our current standards, and if this went forward, we would be, if they put rooftop solar on that was less than 24 inches from the roof, that would be exempted from the height limit. But the structure would not be exempt from the height limit.
Okay, because that to me then just says we need to be a little bit more prudent when looking at people who want to exceed the height limits, because we're automatically giving them an extra 24 inches
For the panels.
for the panels.
Right,
correct.
not for the structure.
Actually, can I add something? here?
Sure, I'd love to hear.
So, this technology is changing rapidly. So, for example, in the last short period, Tesla brought out tiles that are actually going to adhere to the roof. So this 24-inch thing, I don't think is going to be something we're looking at a lot moving forward. This is old technology, existing and very old technology. All the new solar stuff that I've been studying is stuff they're looking at adhering to existing roofs, which who knows whether it's going forward or not. But I think if Tesla's looking at it, it's a reasonable thing to expect that that's what we're going to be having. Because currently, you know, if you want to look at my home, we've been trying to think about solar on our home for the last 18 years. And because of our particular roof, we would have to change the entire roof to put solar in our house, which was $150,000 expense. So all of these new technologies are based on actually having them right on the roof. So I don't think that there's going to be too much more of this 24-inch thing, because there's a problem with solar as it exists today relative to these panels that are raised off the roof. And that, you know, when you're talking about somewhere like Tulare Street, you know, the winds come across the hill, and by the time they get to Tulare Street, sometimes they're 80 miles an hour. That's not a good place to be putting solar that's 24 inches off the roof. So I think all of this technology is moving in a way that's not going to be like we've seen in the past, because I do see some of the solar is pretty ugly, 24 inches off the roof, and then we're adding to the building height. So I just wanted to add that.
I appreciate your bringing that up, because I did read about the Tesla panels. Some are glass. They look like tile. They look
Yeah.
like just
look like
regular
roof tile.
asphalt shingles.
Yeah.
Technology is really interesting.
Yeah. Were you done with what you wanted to say? Because I actually had a comment going back a little further, if I may.
I was going to say it doesn't really matter so much since we're in a very short meeting tonight, but technically we're still in questions. So if you have more questions, then please go ahead.
Oh, no, I do.
Yeah, please.
I do.
You're done, Colleen?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
please ask your questions.
Now I lost my place. Now I've totally lost my place. I think it was, here we go. G1.3, and the application forms for solar. I know we were one of the most expensive in the country. I don't know how that fares right now. Can you answer that, Ken?
So a few years ago, City Council approved rate reduction. Essentially, it limits what residential customers would or applicants would pay for solar. So we do have, and I forget the dollar amount. I don't know.
$547 for residential, $729 for commercial.
Sorry, that's for the height exception permit.
Oh.
The actual building permit fee for solar is much less than that. So I'm trying to locate it right now. But it is less than that.
Because I know we were outrageously the most expensive, and it always chapped my hide on that one.
Yeah, that may go back in time. So we do have a fairly low rate for residential systems, and that's just a flat rate.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
I think we're still trying to find out our permit.
Oh, we're waiting for
Just
staff
'cause-
to answer that.
Yeah, because I think it's important for people to know. I mean, it used
Yeah,
to be
we have
very,
time.
really
If they can
outrageous.
pull it up right now, we'll wait for that.
I'll be right back with it.
Okay, we will wait
I
for
think
you.
we have a long agenda here, do we?
No, it's short. Anyone have any questions while Ken's going to dig that up?
Not questions. I actually just would love to discuss this a little more, but not a question, so I guess it's not appropriate at this time.
It's all right.
Oh, good.
We've got the time.
So I'll just ask a question relative to this. Have we done any studies in town to look at the cost savings, the energy savings, and what outweighs one over the other for homes that, and I know we discussed this years ago, homes that put in LED lighting versus solar at the efficiency studies and things like that? Because I'll just use me as an example. With every renovation that we've done in our home, we've replaced every light with LEDs, and the last thing our electrician said to us was, you don't even need solar, you've reduced your energy consumption by so much just with these LEDs. And it'd be really nice if we knew if we had that kind of information just available for everybody, because many years ago on the Planning Commission we talked about cost over time.
Mm-hmm.
The investment it's $400 per LED, but over 5 years your cost is down to zero, and I've never seen any of these studies.
Yeah,
we look at that maybe?
I'm pretty sure the city has never done a Brisbane specific study. My gut reaction is it might vary based on the home.
Well, just replacing, say, the entire, let's look at an 1,800 square foot home and replacing all of the lighting with LEDs. What does that look like versus the investment for putting solar on a house of that size?
Right.
Just as an exercise in, where are people going to be spending their money?
Yeah, that's something that if you guys want to include that in your recommendation to council, that they pursue a study to give that information, that's something you guys could recommend.
Okay.
But we have not embarked on that kind of study. Is that right?
I just caught the tail end of this, but I've looked on PG&E's site fairly recently. I think they have, if I remember right, where you can get in and do cost calculations and modeling for I'm seeing nods from Barbara there, that you can go through on your specific home and essentially fill out a form that will pop out recommendations for how to improve your energy demands for your own home.
Yeah,
so there are tools out there.
Yeah,
I don't know of any studies that the
right, well, the
city...
energy demands are one thing, but it's like we're talking about, solar and things like that. Looking at the cost of putting solar on my home, I'd have to replace my roof, which is $150,000. That's not going to happen. Versus just replacing your entire lighting system with LEDs when we're talking about stuff like this. I think it would be interesting information to have available.
And
Well, we do, but we're still in questions.
going back to your other question, this was back in 2006. The fee for residential solar is a flat rate, and it stayed that way of $250.
Oh.
So that includes the plan check and the permit itself.
I must be looking way before 2006 then, when I thought it was totally outrageous. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions?
Nope, thank you.
Motion to open for public commentary? What? Not necessary. Okay, let's open to public commentary. Do any members of the public have any comments?
So, Barbara Abel, the short answer is that conservation always pays better than capital improvements, or almost always. So changing out LED light bulbs is usually going to be a better bet, and because then you can at least put in a smaller solar system, PV system. So that's the short answer. I mean, there are always edge cases depending on what kind of user you are. If you have an electric car, changing LED light bulbs might not reduce your overall load adequately to shift the balances. The other thing I can say is that not Brisbane specific. I think that would be a really huge study for Brisbane to undergo. But at the state level, they do these cost-benefit analyses, and because they have to do them before it gets rolled into the Green Building Code, because it has to have a certain payback period before it can be incorporated into the Green Building Code. And LED lighting, I can't remember, or it went into the Energy Code. Anyway, it has been studied. It's gone into the Building Code, so at the state level. And I just wanted to say, if you're going to be granting people an extra 2 feet first of all, I just tried to find data online about, let me back up. So solar tiles have been around for a long time. They're not a new technology. They haven't been around as long as crystalline photovoltaic, but they've been around a long time. I just tried to pull up some data on what the market percentage is. I couldn't find anything real specific, but it does look like the crystalline panels are like 99% of the market at this point, and I'm sure that Tesla's technology will become the dominant technology at some point in the future, but I think crystalline is going to be with us for a long time to come. There's a certain momentum in the market, and the panels that are put on today are probably going to sit there for 30 years before somebody replaces them with tiles. So I think you guys ought to consider lowering the building heights by 2 feet. I don't think that's going to happen. Nobody's going to listen to me, but I think you should, because effectively you've just raised them 2 feet, at least on new construction. All right, thanks. That's what I wanted to say.
All right, well, there's no other members of the public, so I guess we can go on to... Oh, so I have to make a motion to close the public hearing, although I don't...
No.
But okay. I'm still getting this open and close business down. Could I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Go ahead.
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Deliberations.
I've said all I need to say.
Reflecting on what Barbara Ebel said, I echo the same concern that if we're waiving height limits and then we're giving an extra 24 inches, it just seems like we have a code and we don't always abide by it. So I'm not a stickler for detail. I think on a case-by-case basis, but again, are we being too free with this? And on new construction, I would try more to keep these within the height limits. Because devil's advocate, I don't see why anyone's going to come in and stay within the height limit if they don't have to. They won't. They'll just say, I'm going to add 24 more inches because anyone can do that. So I don't know what we do about it. I'm just verbalizing.
Sorry, through the chair, can I ask a clarification question?
Yes, please.
So are you concerned that people will build, take the solar panels out of the equation, it's just a home with a roof? Are you concerned that the actual roof structure itself would be 2 feet higher than would otherwise be allowed if this section as drafted was passed?
No.
Okay.
No, I understand.
So it is that
you were very clear the way you explained it. That was my question going back to new construction, that were they going to have the same ability as an existing home to add the 24-inch, up to 24-inch panels, and you clarified that was true.
Do you have any more comments after Colleen's comments?
Sure do. If we want to change the roof height of the buildings that we currently have, I think that is, once again, a bit of a stretch for the Planning Commission, and that needs to go to the City Council. It also needs to be a public hearing that is well public noticed. And then if there are certain people who would like to see the building codes changed to reduce the heights that are allowed in Brisbane, that is not something we should be discussing. I think that is way beyond our scope, and I understand why some people want that. I think it is completely inappropriate. We have building codes in place right now, and what you would effectively be doing right from this get-go by saying we're not going to go ahead with this in any way, shape, or form is make sure nobody puts solar on their roofs. That's what would happen. Everybody in this room has the houses they want, and if you want to change the rules, that's not something we should be doing right here and now. It's something that should be, thank you, Barbara. It's something that should go to the City Council. It should be public noticed to every person who has a building site that has not been built on. It should be sent out to every single homeowner relative to people who may or may not want to change their buildings moving forward, so they can weigh in on this conversation, not just 3 or 4 people. So I think it's inappropriate to say, well, we're not going to do this because of maximum height. We don't like this idea. If that's the way you feel about it, then I feel it should go directly to the City Council and to every single homeowner in Brisbane to weigh in on this issue.
If I may comment, I don't disagree with you. However, I was not suggesting that we change the height. I think you misunderstood what I was saying.
Can you clarify, please?
What I said was very simple, just simply that adding the extra 2 feet I found troubling because we have so many exceptions, and I understand at times because of the terrain or the architecture they've been granted. I'm just concerned now that going forward with the extra 2 feet allowance, that perhaps we need to look at those extra allowances over the height when they come up. I'm not suggesting changing the code. I'm just saying I think we need to recognize we do have a code and just keep all these factors in mind. That's all I said.
Right. Well, I think it affects every homeowner in Brisbane, and therefore it needs to be a public discussion.
So a clarification, this streamlining process, this was proposed by the city. It was not mandated by the state. Is that correct?
Correct. So the state mandated streamlining was referring to, like I explained earlier, that when building permit applications come in for certain systems on the rooftop of residential buildings that are under a certain size, that we would have an accelerated review, building permit review timeframe. The state regulations allow a city to impose compliance with zoning requirements. So height. We also look at setbacks. So if you have, for example, a house that encroaches into a setback, your panels have to comply with the setback, even if your structure doesn't. So the streamlining provisions from the state do not preclude the city from requiring this, which is why it's not something that initially was considered as a part of those streamlining ordinances. So it's really just in practice that staff has collected this data, basically, that, you know, the state intent, which was to streamline these systems because of their small size, because they're on existing residential structures, that it just wasn't capturing the unique circumstances of our city. So it's really kind of just piggybacking on the original intent of the state mandate. That's where these amendments are coming from.
And the recommendation from staff is to either make the height restrictions less restrictive or the same, and we're not talking about reducing in any way any entitlements.
Correct. So what's in the the resolution in the draft ordinance is no changes to the actual height limits in any zoning district. The change would be we would no longer consider rooftop solar panels within 24 inches of the roof to be a separate structure or something subject to the height limit. It would exempt specifically the solar panels from inclusion under the height limit, unless it goes over 24 inches, in which you would still be subject to compliance with the overall height maximum.
All right, thank you. So we have 3 items on the agenda tonight, and I thought that perhaps we should have a brief discussion about what we as a commission would like to recommend to City Council for each of these 3 items.
So you're saying that you don't want to go along with any of the recommendations that are put before us tonight? You want to recommend them back to the City Council, or what are you saying?
Isn't that our purpose tonight, is to send the recommendations from staff to City Council, either recommending that City Council adopt it or recommend that staff make amendments before. So we've had some comments tonight, but so far there have been no proposals about how we're going to act, and I thought that perhaps we should be more specific before just calling it to a vote. Yes?
Sure.
Does anyone have any comments or recommendations about what we would like to do?
I have nothing I want to change on housing element, professional services, or the solar panels.
Okay, so you're recommending
That we send it to City Council as is.
approve all 3.
Mm-hmm.
And
The only thing that I would endeavor to change is on the solar that exceeds 24 inches, that instead of just requiring residents to appeal a decision of the zoning administrator, that it automatically be moved to the Planning Commission for a hearing.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
mm-hmm.
That's a great idea. Yep.
All right.
Greg, you?
Yes, I have no desire to change the SRO or professional services section. In terms of the section on rooftop solar streamlining, I am in general in favor of streamlining solar. I don't think that requiring a height
Of
exception.
a 24?
No, I'm talking about simply, I'm addressing directly the recommendation from staff
Okay.
to allow streamlining.
Okay,
Of-
can you read it? Can you read it then? Because I'm a little confused now, and I'm sure if anybody's watching, they're probably confused too.
Excellent point.
Thank you.
So where are we?
Right at the end here.
Staff recommendation.
G117, I think. Yeah. Oh, hang on one sec.
Skimming through.
G117. G116, G117. C. G116 it starts.
Yeah, no, I think G17 is where I'm at.
Okay.
Rooftop solar energy systems may exceed the maximum building height limit of the applicable zoning district in accordance with the following procedures. That they do not extend more than 24 inches above the roof line of the structure on which they are mounted, measured from the exterior roofing material to the highest point of the panel. So, basically, I think this is a pretty good idea to streamline solar. I'd like to see solar be easy to install. I can imagine some instances where, in the higher elevations, a house that's already high that has solar panels that extend above the height limit might cause some of the neighbors to complain that, because their view is being blocked, that their property values are going down. But so I'm a little ambivalent on it, but I suppose that this discussion could happen at the city council level, and I'm okay with recommending the streamlining.
Could I ask for clarification through the chair?
Yes.
So, just as a reminder, so the existing height exception procedure, it basically says that unless there will be an adverse impact on the public health or safety, that the exception permit should be approved.
I see. So unless someone's afraid that the solar panels are going to fall on their driveway or something, then
Sure. That's typically would be the concern that, well, of course, people can share their concerns with aesthetics as well, but aesthetics aren't really built in, economic value, that sort of thing is not really
Right.
something that's considered in the height exception procedure. So I just want to make sure that that was clear.
So can you
in your
clarify
discussion.
then that the existing requirements for a height exemption for solar panels, is there an existing cutoff at 2 feet?
No, there is none. So if you look at that same page you were just on, that was the red line text. So anything that's not red is what's there existing. So there is no such exemption currently. If a solar panel application is submitted and we require solar companies to give us architectural elevations, which is challenging, and they do, and using our height measurement, it is over the height limit, then again, that triggers the height exception process that we just were talking about.
Right.
There's
So
no
what-
exemption.
So what you're saying is that although neighbors are noticed and they have an opportunity to respond, that there's very little actionable objection that they can pose at the moment already.
Right, unless
So
it's
we're not
related
really
to
taking
health and
anything
safety
away.
concerns.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that explanation. I think at this point, or did you have more questions or comments?
Just give me 2 seconds, please.
Okay.
I think Colleen's comment was that if for some reason, and there could be, given our steep hills, and not that too much solar is mounted on the west side of the hill anyway, correct? Because there's no point. That instead of it just being an administrative thing, that it should go to the Planning Commission. I would agree with that.
On the panels that exceed 24 inches.
Yeah, on
is
the
what
panels
I
that
said.
exceed
So if they were
24.
under 24, it would be streamlined. But if it's over 24, instead of the neighbors having to get together and try to appeal and write a lot of letters, there shouldn't be that many where they
No.
would automatically
Right.
go to the Planning Commission.
I think that's a really wise move. Yes, no? Ken, you're looking confused?
No, I think I understand what you're getting at is basically on C2
Right.
that we would add some language that if a complaint or a concern was raised by a neighbor, that it would not have to be appealed to the Planning Commission, but that it would automatically go to the Planning Commission.
I think what Colleen said, and I agree with her, is that if the panels are over 24 inches, that they have to come and ask for an exception through the Planning Commission rather than trigger the neighbor stuff. Is that correct?
Oh, you don't want it to go to the ZA at all at that point. You want it to be a Planning Commission item.
Well, is that what you said?
Well, all that I said is I took exception to neighbors having only 10 days to respond, and
Right.
if someone's out of town or they don't get organized, and it says that it could move forward, so then they'd have to appeal the decision. So I think that's putting a burden on them, and the burden shouldn't be put on them. So I don't know how you want to make the mechanism, whether it automatically goes to the Planning Commission, or whether if one person submits a written comment, that then it has to go to the Planning Commission.
I would like to suggest that if it's over 24 inches, because there's already an issue with that, and I actually think all of this moving forward is going to be under it, but just to have it covered, that if it's over 24 inches, I mean, somebody could need a 36-inch strut on the side of their house to get enough sun to make it viable to put it on their house, that if it's over 24 inches, they come to the Planning Commission for a variance
So,
or whatever that looks
so
like.
I would keep it in the exceptions. Variance is a whole different
Yes,
animal in terms of the
I
findings.
understand. Okay, so
difficulty.
is that exception, is that the correct language?
Yeah, exceptions. So,
Does that make sense?
Yes, I agree with that.
That makes sense, Greg?
just by way of background, and Julia, you've done more of these recently, and I've done them over time.
Well, you don't want to discourage people from doing it either.
Right, and I what I've seen is I can't recall any neighbors actually expressing concern. If anything, they have expressed support because
You never know.
Can I give a little bit of, in the past 2 years I have worked here, I have processed 2 height exception permits and countless building permits. So we're really talking about here, it's, I have not heard from neighbors either supporting or denying. And I think going to commission requires just as much in terms of like, if you apply for a building permit for a solar panel, rather than going through the 3-week review process for a building permit and then potentially the height exception process, if you were to then had to go to the planning commission, that would add on, given, we meet twice a month, occasionally we cancel meetings, we need at least 10 days of public notice. It would add on a lot of processing time. And again, I'm just not clear in terms of I'm clear on the findings being related to health and safety. I'm just not sure what, if you guys are interested in changing the required findings to make, I'm just curious what the end result would be.
If I had a suggestion based on what I'm hearing, the concern is, I'm hearing a concern over time, and so maybe that might be something to change, is to go to, say, 15 days instead of 10 days, possibly.
I think one other concern is, I think all of us have seen solar panels in many configurations, and we assume it's a gable roof or a flat roof. But I've seen some solar panels, to aim them right, that were almost standing straight up. And when you allow anything over 24 inches with no recourse, and other people are saying, wow, this is huge now on this building, that's my concern, because then there's no restriction, but you have the zoning administrator making this decision and relying on the neighbors. They've got to get their act together to say something.
So you just want to change the time then? That would be, but I would not even, I would say 21 days or something like that. I mean, people are away on vacation for 2 weeks at a time. So, 10 days just seems like,
I don't.
does that sound reasonable?
Certainly the time extension sounds reasonable, but I'm still a little bit unclear about which specific scenarios we're addressing.
Over 24 inches.
If it's a 5-foot solar panel, is it still health and safety the only issue?
What other issue would there be? If it's a 5-foot solar panel on top of a roof.
Okay, that's the only.
What?
So would you say that the 5-foot solar panel would endanger you? Is that why you would want to appeal it to the planning commission?
No, we didn't say that. We went through that and we got back to the extra time.
Right, extra time to the zoning.
Yeah, because Colleen's totally right. It's like you could be out of town for 10 days, and that's not a. Just trying to be fair to everybody.
Yeah, no, I understand. I have no objections.
And honestly, I think this is all going to be moot in a couple of years.
I think,
by the by, but
perhaps,
we've got to be covered.
It also seems the number of exceptions are going to be very few, but that even if it's just the extra time, I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm just wondering if someone has an example of a health and safety issue that they might raise about solar.
5-foot panel blowing through my window in a 90-mile-an-hour windstorm on Tulare Street, which is possible. I mean, that's about all I can think of. I mean, I'm
So through the chair, it's
Yes.
it's an interesting set of findings, and staff, I'll be quite candid here, staff has questioned this over the years because really the health and safety issues are addressed through the building code. So when they apply for a permit, they're gonna, if there's a wind concern, which the building department would be keyed into, they're going to have to do calculations, whatever, to show that these panels aren't going to fly off. So it's kind of an interesting set of findings. And so if aesthetics is the issue because they're standing straight on end, I think that's a whole nother matter. So this, I think the language of this will help to keep, generally, people don't want to do extra permits. They don't want to go to the ZA if they don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the way this is structured, it's going to keep the vast majority under that 2-foot limit unless they really have to get the angle or whatever to make it effective for their house. And so then they'll go through the ZA. So I think the way this is structured, and I'd struggle to come up with new findings. So that's why we didn't really touch it here. But I think the intent is to let's capture what we can in that 2-foot limit, and we'll probably have very few that'll want to go on to the ZA.
Sorry, what page was the time limit on? I just wanted to...
It's G17.
G17.
Under C2.
It's C1, 2, 3, halfway down the third paragraph, Greg. Or 3/4 of the way down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up from the bottom of.
Okay, so as it currently exists, if you exceed the height limitation, then the ZA will notice the neighbors. They have 10 days, and we're just suggesting to increase that to 21 days.
I think that's fair. Okay.
Okay, I understand.
Does that sound good to you guys too?
Seems reasonable.
All right. Gonna round the circles. Come back to that. Thank you.
All right. Okay, I think I'm clear on that. Everyone's clear
Yeah,
on
I'm
that.
clear on that now.
Anyone have any other items to ask or discuss?
Okay. In section D, that would have to be changed as well.
Okay.
D
10
1,
days
2,
appears
3,
more than one.
4. Fourth line down, it says hearing within 10 days.
Mhm.
We need to change that too.
So just to clarify, that's
that's-
existing for accessibility, which is its own
Yeah, that's a-
realm
Oh, okay.
of,
Sorry. Never mind.
has different governing legislation as
I
well.
need better glasses.
All
Thank
right, then. Can I have a motion to approve the zoning text amendments as listed, with the exception of increasing the amount of time neighbors have to respond to notification from the zoning administrator?
I'll make a motion. Do I need to read the entire draft here? Okay, I'll make a motion to accept as is, with the exception of changing the notification to 21 days for neighbors for solar panels over 24 inches.
I would second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Items initiated by staff.
We'll tag team this one. So a few different things. Council has directed staff to begin the recruitment for planning commissioner seat, and the recruitment period will end on June 30th. That's Friday at close of business, 1 o'clock. Council's, I guess, scheduling the interviews for appointments after their July 20th council meeting. So that's coming up. And
All right.
we have also city clerk who was sworn in today, Ingrid Padilla, and I'm sure you've all met her before. She's been with the city for some time already, so she was promoted up, so we're pleased to announce that, along with a couple other promotions today. So,
Oh, very good.
yeah. And
Who?
Angel Ibarra is we lost Angel, so we're sad, but the the city manager's office has gained an excellent worker there, and Lori in finance as well.
Okay, thank you.
So I just want to update you on some of your recommendations that went to council recently. So council at their April 27th meeting took up the medical cannabis text amendments, which would have addressed personal cultivation in residential districts and then some classes of businesses as conditional uses. As you probably know, because you follow this all, I'm sure this is not news to you, but they ended up continuing to a date to be determined. We're thinking maybe sometime in June we'll come back to them. They had asked for some comparison between the medical cannabis state legislation and the more recently adopted recreational under the Adult Use of Marijuana Act that passed as a proposition in the fall. So just to update you, that's still an ongoing discussion item at council. They also at that meeting approved the previously your previous recommendations regarding the TC2, is that correct?
That's correct.
So that was approved and will be in effect, if not now, very shortly. And then the other item, I just wanted to say, we have been diligently working with our consultants on the Parkside plan. It's been quite a long time since we had any sort of public workshop. The last workshop was in September. I'm happy to announce that we are hopefully going to be publishing the draft for public review in the next 2 weeks. I would expect about a month in between the time it is released to when it would come to you guys as a public hearing. So I think that's exciting. So let's look out for that maybe in June potentially. Of course, as soon as we do release it, it'll be widely noticed, available both on the website at City Hall, and the public hearings will also be noticed as well.
Is this round including a financial study?
That is, well, we have the economists, strategic economics, who've been providing throughout the entire project market analyses, and which you've all reviewed. So the plan is prepared in that framework in mind, and with the input of the economic analysts' findings.
Great. Do we have any items initiated by commission?
I would just like to thank staff for all their input on the solar panels and your patience. And your explanations were really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have nothing.
All right. I have nothing as well. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion that we adjourn to our next meeting of May 25th, 2017.
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.